Today I'm going to explain to you all the answer to a question that I get asked all the time, and it's about distress sprays. So really there's kind of three main sprays that you may be looking at purchasing or using. You may have already bought them and not sure how to use them, but I'm going to explain the difference between distress oxide sprays, distress spray stains and distress spritzes, which is the newest one on the market. Now, each of the top ones, the oxide sprays and the spray stains, do come in the full variety of the distress range colours, but at the moment the distress spritzes only come in these first 12 colours. To understand the difference between the oxide sprays and the spray stains is to understand the difference between oxides and inks within the distress range. It's quite simple. Both oxide, and we'll refer to these as ink sprays, are made up of a dye base, a coloured liquid base. This is a dye that is going to soak into your paper. Whereas the oxide sprays, the same as the oxide ink pads, have the addition of a pigment added to it. It's this pigment that you can see sitting at the bottom of the bottles, and this is what is then going to sit on top of your paper when applied and not soak in, and this is going to give you that chalky look. The distress spritzes are a clear liquid, so not a coloured dye base, and the pigment is floating around in there much like with the oxides, but rather than having the coloured base, you've got that clear base and you'll only see the pigment sitting on top of the paper. So let's see all three of these in action to compare them. Let's start on some simple white cardstock and take one of our oxide sprays. So because this has the pigment settled in it, you need to give this one a shake. This is going to mix the coloured dye base in with that chalky liquid that's floating around in there. It's beautiful, vivid colour, and you can apply it thinly or thickly. Now, while that's drying, let's take a look at a spray stain. We don't need to shake this because the dye is the coloured base. The colour is not going to separate from the liquid, so no shaking required with spray stain. And this is again a very, very vivid colour, in fact more so than the oxides, because the oxide has that pigment which gives it a slightly chalky look. And then the spritzes, again this does have a pigment in it, so it will need shaking up thoroughly before you use it, but rather than this one having the coloured water base or coloured dye base, this one's got a clear base. This means that when you spray a spritz, you can do it ever so lightly to get speckles, and you're not going to get a base colour, but you can also apply this quite thickly to get that full coverage if you wish. Now let's dry all of these and take a look at them close up. So here's the three sprays all dried off. Now if I turn this over, you can clearly see that the dye-based one soaked into the paper much more and nearly came through the other side, because the dye is essentially just a liquid, no pigment or mica or anything in there that's going to sit on top of the surface of the paper. As you can see, it's a flat matte colour. Now I've not used the perfect cardstock for spritzes and sprays because I'm not going to be crafting with this and I'm not looking for an end result, but you can still see how they would work on your craft cardstocks. So here, the distress oxide spray, we can see around the outside we have that dye base. Of course we have that lovely vivid colour, but in the middle, this cloudy patch is that pigment. That's what sits on top of the paper and doesn't soak in. On the other side we have our spritzes. So this spritz is very heavily applied. You can see again it's sitting on top of the paper. It's not soaked in the same way as the dye did, but you've got this gorgeous shimmer to this one, whereas the other two are perfectly matte. Now with the spritz, when we spritzed it ever so lightly and we just got a splattering, this is where we can clearly see that actually the liquid that the pigment is floating around in is perfectly clear, because we only see that mica splat. Now there is going to be a big difference when you try to use your sprays on anything other than white cardstock. So with the oxides, if you imagine you've actually got the pigment sitting on top of the paper and the dye soaking in, you're going to get a very different look to if you were to use a spray stain because the dye is going to soak in. So let's take a look at these two fairly similar colours. I've got abandoned coral here in the Oxide Spray. I'm going to shake it up to make sure that all of that pigment is mixed up within the dye-based liquid, and spritz this on the paper. And as you can see, you can clearly see that colour there. Now as that dries, that's going to create that oxidization effect and look nice and chalky and cloudy, and we can also add water to that to increase that effect. Then let's have a look at the spray stain. So no need to shake, although I always do this out of habit. This you are not really going to see on the cardstock at all. I've put a really heavy application there. You can probably see that running just a little with the oxide. You can't see it. It's soaking into the paper. The dye has a translucency to it as well, so you're just going to see that darker colour cardstock come through. So there's the three colours on the black cardstock. Now you can't see it on here, but we have a little warping here where that dye has soaked into the paper. But as you can see, you cannot see the dye through the black. You can see the oxide sitting on top, but you can see gaps in the oxide speckles where again the dye part of this spray has soaked in. You can't see that on the darker cardstock, but you can see that pigment left over. And the same here, we've got the clear liquid with the coloured pigment inside, and you can definitely see that shimmer. It looks absolutely stunning on the black cardstock. All three of these types of sprays are only made for porous surfaces. They are not going to be holding onto things like your glass, your plastic, your metal or your acetate. They do need to soak in to a point to something like paper or cardstock. So pros and cons for each. I'd say with the oxide sprays, the pros are obviously that these are going to show up on any colour surface that you decide to apply them to. But the cons probably that you do have to mix them up, and I suppose the colour is sometimes a little unpredictable because you expect it to be the colour of the label, but actually you often get more of a cloudy look to it once it's dry. Now with the spray stains, you are going to get bright, vivid colours so long as you are using it on a white or a very pale coloured background. Obviously the con with this is that you are not going to be able to see this on your darker colours, but an advantage is that you don't need to be shaking it up to mix up that pigment, and you know exactly what colour you are going to get from the ink. And pros and cons with the distress spritzes. Now at the moment there are only 12 colours. That may be an advantage to some of you, so you don't feel like you have to buy the whole collection, and I'm sure there are going to be more added soon. But with these ones I do find you do not get the colour that is on the label at all. It's not quite as colourful or as rich as this. So when you are looking at the bottles, look at the mica, usually settled in the bottom. Now this is obviously a disadvantage because you do need to shake these up, but the shimmer that you get with this is unlike any other distress product that I have ever used. It is absolutely stunning, and obviously as we see it will show up on any colour surface. So I hope this has helped give you a nice overview of the three different types of distress spritzes and sprays, and help you decide which ones to purchase and how best to use them. Thank you for joining everybody. Take care, and I'll see you again very soon.